6B3.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to invite the Transit Alliance up. They're going to give us an update on the Better Bus project that has been championed by the Transportation Committee and also this commission as a whole. And as I believe there's something we need to pass out, you have a package for every commissioner?
Yeah, we can either leave it for the end or you can put it in the beginning. I'll explain what's in the packet through the presentation.
Okay, how much time do you think you need?
10 minutes to present and then discussion's up to you.
Oh, that's a lot.
Usually I give 5-minute presentations, but I've been told to go
that's what I
slower.
I prefer the 5-minute presentation.
That's my
We have a
usual.
long agenda. No, I control this meeting.
I know. I don't know if Director Rao is around and wants to say any words before I start, or Carlos, do you know? Okay, I'll just start. Azhar Chogle, 169 East Flagler Street. I'm the Executive Director of Trans Alliance. We are an advocacy organization advocating for better public transit in Miami. I'm here to brief you on the Better Bus project. I still got a 5-minute timer, but... 2 parts to this presentation, project status and network concepts, so we're all on the same page. Starting with the project status, 2 out of 3 of our transit riders are on the buses, and our county bus ridership has fallen significantly from 78 million boardings in 2013 down to 52 million in 2018. Alice, would you like to say something before? Now might be the best time.
Alice Bravo, Director of Transportation and Public Works. I want to say that we've been working very closely together with the Transit Alliance, and they're a consultant, very reputable consultant that has helped improve ridership in other cities. So we're working with all of our data and basically running these models together.
Thank you, Alice.
Thank you, Director. So we are in a bit of a transit crisis when it comes to our bus system. We have one of the steepest drops in bus ridership in the entire country. And when you look at a map of our existing system, it hides a few things that you might not see. For example, routes that look like this. And as you can imagine, no one actually drives like that, but we force our transit riders to. Only 5 county routes arrive every 15 minutes or less throughout the day, which is very, very small compared to our overall system. And we have trolley systems that are fragmenting the overall system and not working as best as they can with the overall county network. So we proposed to this board to redesign the bus network and integrate 3 trolley systems. This is the sort of thing that a lot of cities around the country are doing and having a lot of success with. The cities that are improving their bus ridership have done projects like this where they redesign their bus networks to be more effective than they are now. This also is a very unique project, and that is the first time in the country that a non-profit organization is leading a bus network redesign. We are doing it in partnership with the Department of Transportation and Public Works and Jared Walker and Associates. It's also the first time in the country that a bus system redesign has been funded by the community. So not only Miami-Dade County, the City of Miami, and City of Miami Beach, but also Microsoft Transit Center, Miami Foundation, the Health Foundation of South Florida. And this board unanimously passed a resolution of support to have this project proceed. So a quick timeline. So where we are, we just ended our evaluation of the entire network, and we completed the choices report, and we delivered it to all of your offices on Transit Live, and we got to meet some of you. Here are some pictures from that. And the most important thing to take away from the choices report is to understand a diagram like this, because this is your bus routes color-coded by frequency. So focus on the red lines. When the handouts come out, this will be a bit easier to see. But the red lines are the lines that arrive every 15 minutes throughout the day. As you go down the colors, the lightest lines arrive every 60 minutes throughout the day. I divided the map in 2 because actually in the south, you don't have any red lines, no frequent routes. The second biggest takeaway from the choices report is the routes that are most successful have some characteristics in common. They run more frequently, so they do run at 15 minutes, 20 minutes. They run throughout the day, so they don't disappear in the middle of the day. They don't disappear on the weekends. They run in straighter lines as opposed to making a lot of deviations. And they follow a ridership recipe, something we've talked about in committee, but the basics of it connects to lots of people to lots of jobs. Transit is very useful that way. Right now, we're entering the concepts phase, which will last from September through November. And then after the concepts phase, we will design a final network for your vote in February. And just to be clear, we are designing an implementation plan. This is not a study. The network that you vote on in February, if you vote it through, gets implemented. If you do not vote it through, does not. The big question that we're trying to answer with these concepts is there are 2 main ways to design transit networks, 2 main goals. One, you spread out your service thin, but you end up with a situation that we have where we only have 5 routes that arrive every 15 minutes throughout the day, but you reach every corner. Regardless of how many people are there, you reach every corner. The other way to design a transit network is to focus on the places that have the most people and provide them with the best possible service, and that's ridership. These two competing goals, every transit network is a mixture of these two, and we need to decide what our mix will be. The project is completely cost neutral, so we're not adding money in, we're not taking any money out, which means the decisions that come with that sort of scenario are harder. And so to skip over to the network concepts, which is what we are presenting today. So we have one network concept that focuses on that idea of spreading out service, and one network concept that focuses on building ridership by providing extremely frequent service. The way that we've designed these is a combination of data and input, and I just want to show you a bit of the behind the scenes of how we ended up here. In terms of the data, we know how many people get on and off at every single stop in Miami-Dade County. We've also mapped out residential density, employment density, activity density, which is a combination of the two, poverty density, minority density, households with no car. Gives you an X-ray of the county of the places transit's most likely to succeed and where it might not. In terms of input, we just finished our first survey, which was in paper and online. Over 2,200 responses, and I'm going to give you some of those responses because they will help guide your decisions, as this decision will fall with the County Commission. So the first question was, would you rather have a shorter walk to the bus stop but a long wait for the bus? Would you rather have a longer walk to the bus stop but a short wait for the bus? Or, I don't care, I will do whatever gets me there fastest. And I'll explain why we asked this question, but basically, you can spend a lot of time walking to a bus route, but the bus still might arrive every 60 minutes. Would people prefer to walk a bit longer and arrive at a bus route that arrives every 30? Most people, the vast majority of people in the county, do not care, which means that they would rather do whatever gets them there the fastest. The smallest portion of the population, that's 18% in our respondents, would prefer to have a shorter walk. Most people would prefer to have a longer walk if it gets them better service. The reason this matters is that within the concepts, what you will see, and again, we use this information to help guide what we design, is you might have someone who has an option of two 30-minute routes going side by side, and they can walk to either one of them. But you might see in the concepts in the ridership one, that becomes a 15-minute route. So they have to walk a little bit further, but they get a bus coming every 15 minutes because the cost of missing a 30-minute route and the cost of missing a 60-minute route is a much longer wait. The second question that we asked is very blunt. Should we remove buses on the least popular routes to increase service on the most crowded routes? So removing buses from routes that don't have a lot of people, putting them on the routes that have a lot of people. The community is split on this one. Not very sure. It's pretty much down the middle. And the reason that's important is this is a question that U.S. commissioners are going to face as part of this process because it's a very complicated diagram. But basically what's highlighted, those are bus routes that carry less than 15 boardings an hour, which is very low. They don't carry a lot of people. So the reason we ask these questions is if you want to move towards gaining ridership, you have to invest in the routes that carry a lot more people than just 15 boardings an hour. The third question we asked is, should we run more buses where we have the most bus riders in Miami-Dade and less service everywhere else? And the community is generally more favorable on this one. 56% strongly agree, which speaks to something that your districts are not built equally. What I mean by that is density fluctuates between your districts. Some of you have a lot of density of jobs and housing, some of you do not. And this question sort of portends that the community is generally more comfortable with us making decisions based on where do we have the most people and the most jobs. Because again, transit does not get drawn and transit does not run on district lines. It runs on density. A second layer of input is we also held a priorities workshop, which some of you and your staff attended. And we asked the same similar questions. Over 60 people attended, members from business leaders in partnership with the Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce, your staff, municipal elected officials, transportation departments. And we held a workshop which was a transit visioning exercise for people to wrestle with these questions sort of in real life. And in that group, we did some anonymous live polling. Over 70% of them would prefer to move to a system that builds ridership. A third layer of input, because we tend to add a lot, is that not only have we been giving community presentations across the county, we also visited all 3 of the bus garages and talked with drivers directly, one-on-one. And they have a lot of good opinions about what should happen with the bus system. But this is just the start of our engagement with them. We're going back to them at least 2 times to show them the concepts and get more feedback. Another layer of input is that these concepts will also go out to over 40 workshops and another survey. So this is just sort of the beginning of the input. So the network concepts themselves, we're going to hand you out a packet with them, and I'm just going to explain what's in the packet before you get it so you know how to navigate it. So first of all, these concepts are going to be extremely controversial. They're designed to be because they're extreme. We have a transit system crisis and we have to do something drastic in order to fix it. In November, this board needs to take a position. You don't have to take a position between, say, I want this concept or I want that concept. What we need to know is where do you stand in between the two? Which way, when we design a final network, what do you want us to prioritize? So the things that you'll get in your packet are the existing network, which again, the red lines are the frequent lines. The coverage concept, and in the coverage concept, you'll see that there are a lot more red lines. That's because the city of Miami has completely redesigned their trolley network. And by doing that, we have some more red lines all across the county. And then one step further, you'll see in the ridership concept, you'll see a lot more red lines and a lot more holes. That's because in the ridership concept, we connect the most jobs with the most number of people with the best possible service. Something that you'll also receive in your packet is an analysis on what these things do across the county. So one of these diagrams is called an isochrone. What's happening here is you're basically seeing how far can someone get in the existing network. Right now, this is from FIU. How far can someone get from FIU in 45 minutes? Not very far. I've highlighted it a bit because it's that dark blue portion. And then how far can they get with this network? That's the part that you see beyond that bubble that I made. That's how far they can get with the new network. And so we compare it actually between the two concepts. And you'll see an exponential increase in people's access to freedom, people's access to opportunity. For FIU, you're talking about students, you're talking about jobs. That's what this is designed to do, is to connect people to more places faster. And we show that in the data of the analysis. Just another example from Liberty Square, where you'll see this trend continue that the more you go towards the ridership direction, generally the farther people can get faster. The other thing you'll have in your packet is a job access outcome chart, which is basically showing you where the places in the county that people will gain access to jobs, that's the blue dots becoming darker, and the places where people might lose access. And also district by district and county-wide, you'll get outcomes in terms of how many people on average within the new system, how many jobs can they access, how many opportunities can they access, and also the average person of color, the average senior, the average person without a vehicle, the average person in poverty. We've mapped out the outcomes for every community of need and every district. Just some summary top lines, and then I'll stop, and then we can have the packets come out. These concepts do some different things, and they're important to highlight. The number of jobs reachable by the average residents in 45 minutes within the coverage concept goes up by 33%. Within the ridership concept goes up by 51%. So again, huge increases. The number of jobs reachable by the average person in poverty in 60 minutes, coverage, 32,000 more jobs, ridership, 50,000 more jobs. Now there are compromises. Again, this is not a magic trick. In coverage, it's mainly an efficiency scenario. We've made the system a lot more efficient. So 60% of our population still has access to transit service. But in ridership, that goes down to 48 because we're taking away that spread of service and we're concentrating it in frequent routes. But the upside to that is the percentage of residents near high-frequency transit, which is only 10% today, goes up to 18% in coverage, goes up to 28% in ridership. Also, when you look at these packets and you realize that there are some municipal trolley systems that aren't mapped because there are a lot of them, so when you feel like there might be holes, there might actually be some trolley systems there. So again, we want to make sure you're prepared to take a position in November, and if the packets aren't with you already, we have the packets for each of you with all of the information that I just presented.
Thank you. Now, you notice I let you go way over, and that's because
I appreciate
very
it.
interesting.
No, but although, to be fair, I came in at 10. I let Alice Bravo, take an extra 2 minutes. By the way, I have Scutterwag from Jared Walker & Associates who will help me back up any data-related questions, as he's much better at that than I am.
Okay, now, how long are you going to take? Because we have a long agenda, and that was the other side. A very interesting
I think we're at your pleasure
report.
here in terms of questions and discussion.
Okay, my colleagues, Commissioner Higgins, you want to close it?
So as your expectations from us is to really analyze these packets, ask questions that need to be done, and then the next step after that would likely go, I guess, through Commissioner Bobo's Transportation Committee would be what?
So each of these concepts has a different ratio. Right now, we dedicate 70% of our resources to ridership, 30% to coverage. In the coverage scenario, 80% to ridership, 20% to coverage. In ridership, 90%, 10%. The eventual outcome is we need direction from the board and what that ratio needs to be. Because you can be 90-10, where you have a lot of red lines, not many teal lines. You can be 85-15, you can be 80-20. That's the direction that we need, and it should probably go through the Transportation Committee next month. and then to the full board in November so that we have time to design the final plan afterwards.
Okay.
I would just add, there's one other key policy question that is included in these concepts. Sorry. There's one other key policy question included in these concepts. It's described in more detail in the concepts report, which will be released today. And that is a question about stop spacing, because if you space stops farther apart, buses can go faster, and your average time to get somewhere will be faster up to a certain point of about a quarter mile or so in terms of stop spacing. And so a key question is, if we widen stops, buses can go faster, you can get farther in general, but of course some people have trouble walking, some places are difficult to, don't have the best walkability, and therefore there's a policy question embedded in there about that stop spacing, and that's another policy question that we have for you that we need input on.
Okay, thank you. Well, I just want to thank you for all the work and all of the information you provided to me over the course of the summer. I have learned more about our bus system. I thought I knew a lot, but I learned that I didn't know as much as I needed to know, and I really appreciate all of that. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Modestine, then Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I did enjoy your staff presentation in my office with me and my staff. Now, I asked dozens and dozens of questions. I probably have dozens more, but the chair won't allow me to do that today. So let me ask you just one or two questions. What is the rule of thumb? What is the science, basically, that drives the decisions in terms of whether we use coverage or ridership?
Unfortunately, there's no mathematical answer. It's a values choice. So we can choose as a community to spread out service, or we can choose to have ridership. Every community falls in a different pattern. It's just a matter of, we've lost 25 million boardings over the past 5 years. If we do nothing, keep things the same, that pattern will probably continue.
Conventionally, do regions or metropolitan transit entities use ridership as their basis or do they use coverage?
Well, I mean, we're in a scenario here in the county where ridership is the main measurement. Mm-hmm. So if a city, which many cities are choosing to do, wants ridership, there are certain things we need to do. Like, we need to invest in high frequency routes more than routes that don't carry a lot of people. Every city falls in a different spectrum, and Scudder, as the national expert, probably you can answer this better than I can.
Sure. I would emphasize it's a value choice that the community and you all as representatives of the community should choose, because it's not a technical question. It's about the goals and priorities you want transit to achieve for your community. Other communities have faced the same question. We've helped them have a clear conversation about the different value choices. For example, Houston went through looking at their system, which was the existing system they had was about 50% ridership, 50% coverage in terms of the resources spent and where they're going on those goals. They eventually landed on a network design and choosing intentionally before we designed it that they wanted their system to be about 70% ridership and 30% coverage. And that's the network we designed for them. It did have some outcomes where a few people lost service or had a reduction in the frequency of their service, but it created an enormous network of high-frequency routes that got you the ridership result that Az spoke to. So it's really a question of how you want to balance those different values and outcomes. The coverage outcomes, of course, being providing that insurance policy that you're not going to be isolated, that everyone who has something today will keep that, or ridership outcomes are associated with things like supporting reductions in traffic and traffic congestion, or at least giving people more options with frequent service. They support things like reducing auto emissions and denser development. So if you want to encourage more dense walkable development across the county, you need transit for that.
I got it. I know which scenario I'm going to use already. I'm going to support already, but I'm just curious as to why you're not making a recommendation. You're just providing us, the choice of deciding whether it's going to be coverage, ridership, or something in between.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm not an elected official, so it's not for me to say.
Yeah, but usually we used to hearing
exactly. I know
experts recommending.
Exactly.
Especially, I think to a certain extent, your data is pretty clear in terms of your presentation. The presentation that you made here, it's pretty clear as to why my humble opinion, I would decide on a particular scenario. But I just wish that you were saying, okay, this is your recommendation. We're still going to take it or leave it, but this is your recommendation that you are going to make.
I wish it was that simple.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, where's my hopper? Jordan, Carver, Bovo, and Moss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess it really, my question is, does it drill down into the values aspect? Because when you mention about asking the question whether you would like to walk a longer distance or shorter distance or whatever, as I spoke with staff, the question came to mind about, what was the age? Because the favorability was, I'd rather walk a longer distance. And also, did you drill down even deeper in terms of the purpose of the travel, whether it was for work or for school? Were those kinds of things covered? Because I think all of that is important in terms of the decision-making process.
It's difficult to obviously apply that question extremely broadly, but we did ask for age when we asked that question. And I don't know the ratios off the top of my head, but I do remember segmenting out the 65 plus segment and finding that although less people would like to walk that longer distance, the majority still would be willing to walk, because seniors do experience both sides of the equation in a different way, whereby they face the walk, but then once they reach the bus stop, they also have to wait either in the heat or the rain. So they face both sides of the equation. In terms of their vulnerability to those forces, in terms of the younger populations, of course, most of them. If you look at the age brackets, the 25 to 36, under 24, most of them really are in the do not care category. We did not classify the survey by type of trip, because this survey went out not only to transit riders but also to people who don't ride transit and might want to in the future. So in their scenario, there's no existing trip to go by. Thank you, Commissioner.
All right, Commissioner Carver.
Thank you. Great presentation. Really, I've been very active. I've been to these workshops. I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. I think it comes down to, like Commissioner Jordan was getting at, the values. So what I'm hoping maybe you could tease out a little bit more is who's responding which way. So who are the ones that prefer the shorter walk? Who are the ones that are willing to do the longer walk to the more frequent? And I'm guessing that it has something to do with choices. So, we've got two categories, basically. We've got transit dependent and we have choice riders, people that are not currently using and we want them to use to get rid of cars, to reduce congestion. So I think it's important for us to really just understand better different perspectives on those choices. We'll ultimately have to make some value choices, but at least we'll know who's impacted which way. The other thing is, and I just want to put it on the record because I bring it up every time we meet, I'm not satisfied that we're addressing last mile solutions. And so, the elderly person that has to walk a long way but really can't and is not eligible for special transportation, or that doesn't really meet the needs. How do we accommodate that person? So we have some solutions that are out with contracts. The freebie is now being utilized more places. We have other on-demand service potentially. So, I know you're working with a certain framework, which is just the bus aspect of it, but I think it will be extremely helpful to us when understanding choices to see what kind of supplements. And a number of my colleagues, along with myself, have been pushing for more circulators, trolleys, or what you will, in the unincorporated parts where there's potential benefit. So not just the cities benefit from that. So that's something that we need to think about as well. And I know that's beyond the scope of exactly your analysis, but to the extent that the Department of Transportation and Public Works is contributing, and I see CCC, Carlos Cruz Casas, nodding his head, I think it will really help us to frame this so you can go forward with ultimately a recommendation, but based on the values that we suggest. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, Commissioner Bovo, then Moss. You all are ones. You want Commissioner Moss to go now?
right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Hope y'all enjoying your lunch. You said that in Houston, there was a 50-50 mix, 50% coverage, 50% ridership. The choice that they made was a 70-30 mix. 70% coverage, they opted for let's cover more areas.
That's not what I meant. I'm
That's
sorry
not
if
what-
I was unclear about that. They
Okay.
chose 70% ridership focus, 30% coverage. So you think about, like turning a dial on your oven or whatnot in terms of changing the balance. They chose to change the balance more towards higher frequency, higher ridership service.
Okay, well,
less
then I
coverage.
misunderstood.
Yeah,
I thought
sorry
you
about
said
that.
70% coverage and then 30% ridership, and I was trying to figure out then, how did they improve, their ridership if they chose that percentage? Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so I was impressed with the presentation when you came to my office and the explanation you gave to me and how you were starting to get to your numbers. So just a couple of questions, if I can, so you could just put it on the record. As you were doing your work, how did you reconcile what cities are doing with their systems, and how does that impact us as we try to lay out what the vision of the transit, bus transit will look like in the future?
Mm-hmm. So this project includes 3 cities, the city of Miami, Miami Beach, and Coral Gables, because they represent 70% of the trolley ridership. What's amazing and incredible is if you look at the coverage concept, that's the one with the blue in the top left. Again, this is completely cost neutral. People still have the transit service that they had access to. Most people have access to transit, but you have a lot more red lines. That's because the municipality has decided to redesign their trolley system to be very useful, integrated with the county system, run in high-frequency services, essentially allowing the county to be that regional provider and think strongly about the county's role in terms of what the county's role and what the municipality's role is. That can set the precedent for many other trolley systems to come, and ahead of implementation, between the final network plan and implementation, the goal is that we've set a standard for how this can be done, but between final network and implementation, we can bring in even more trolley systems, especially Doral and Hialeah, because they're very large, to be integrated within the system as well.
And I think to the point that one of my colleagues made, when we look at other areas that are, I'm going to call them non-trolley, unincorporated areas, does it contemplate trying to implement in those areas smaller systems, smaller circulators that can operate similarly to what's going on in the different cities, quote unquote, for free, although it's not free, but there's no fare being charged?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, we are working within the construct of what legally exists, that the city receives the money and unincorporated date does not. That's not to say that we have to figure out within the course of this project. It is a great opportunity to answer this question that I think has plagued us for quite a while. But that would require additional legislation, which we're happy to support and examine with your office.
Yeah, and also, how did the plan develop? What's the synergy with the SMART plan? I mean, you obviously, as you know, we're investing a lot of work in the corridors, whether it's construction, whether it's emphasizing development, bringing densities to those numbers. So I'm just interested in how the layout would intersect with the SMART plan, these get on, get off points.
Great question. So there's 2 main components to think about when the SMART plan. There's the infrastructure component and the frequency component. If you look at both of the concepts, especially in the ridership concept, you'll see a 10-minute bus going to the beach, a 10-minute bus going on Flagler, a 10-minute bus going down the busway, a 10-minute bus for some portion of Biscayne going north, but a lot of more frequent service going north. You can achieve some components of the SMART plan early by achieving the frequency component ahead of the infrastructure component. And these corridors, which have been identified for a very long time, they are naturally our strongest transit corridors, and a bus system redesign can bring us closer towards achieving the regional transit picture that's more connected and more frequent.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a challenge, not just to this board, but future boards, is how do we look at the elements of development to create that? You know, there's always going to be a want for track home building, for lack of a better term, the yard, the pool, and that's aspirational. And I grew up that way. But I also realize that in order for us to be able to achieve those density numbers and those ridership numbers, we got to get things, we're going to have to think differently as we do this. Lastly, one of the scenarios is infused with pain.
Yes.
From the standpoint that we would have to eliminate routes in order to achieve the frequencies in other areas. I know that you identified in my district, but how many routes globally would we be looking at as far as collapsing into other areas, other routes to achieve the frequency I think it was the red map, the reddest of the maps that you showed me?
So we usually don't count route by route, but Scudder, what would be the best way to quantify?
I think the best way to be clear about the change and the impact on people's is not so much the number of routes, because the way you organize the routes can have a huge impact on how many routes there are. A clearer picture is if you look at those job access change maps, the redder areas, which there are more of in the ridership concept, even if they're relatively low density areas, those are the areas that would have the most significant loss of access in terms of losing a route or losing service and having either a much longer walk, or in some cases being such a long walk that many people just would feel like they don't have access to transit anymore. So that blue-red job access map change is telling you where in the ridership concept routes are going away and it's a much, much, much longer walk to transit. So that gives you a strong sense of what's happening.
And this will be the last one, Madam Chair. Just on the issue of routes to jobs, I've encountered many folks that use our system that may not be using it to get to their job. They're just getting, to the mall. They want to go to the mall. The system is independence for them to be able to move around. And so I don't know how we kind of grab them, but I would sense that the toughest decision for the board to implement a rewrite of our system is exactly the collapsing of routes, where there are folks, and I think I mentioned it to you, somebody will walk up to me and tell me what's going on with my Route 29. Now, I don't know what Route 29 is, but they definitely know what Route 29 is. And then I went on the map and I saw that Route 29 may no longer exist.
In one of the concepts.
In one of the variations. But I think that's the toughest decision that the board would have to make, is to, how painful are we willing to, deal with as we submit a plan that we know is going to eliminate certain routes that may have almost no ridership except for those one or two folks that will make sure that we know that route was taken away from them. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Can I respond to that? No, it's okay.
I just wanted to add one thing to that. In terms of the access to job measure is not just obviously telling you about the jobs you commute to, but obviously if you're going to the grocery store, there are a lot of jobs at that grocery store. So it's really telling you about a lot of opportunities you can get to. So yeah, it's more than just about the jobs. It's about services and educational opportunities and so on.
Jobs is just a good measure.
They're just a very clear measure of all of those things. And then secondly, your point about the pain is very important, because that is, the more you turn that dial towards high ridership, high frequency in a cost neutral environment means you have to delete lower frequency routes. And the experience in Houston was precisely that. Many people, 2 or 3 people only on this very, low ridership bus, but they have friends and they have neighbors, and they will tell you very strongly that they don't want that to go away. And so that is the very tough choice. And it's not a choice I don't want to paper over the challenge of that at all, because it is a very tough choice.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, Commissioner Suarez.
Couple of quick questions. This project, which is really a study from what I can tell, not a project, cost about $500,000?
The total project budget is $630,000, out of which the county contributed $250,000, and we fundraised the entirety on our own in 2 months.
The buses and trolleys, well, let me just concentrate on the buses that we run. The trolleys are mostly run by cities. Do they have real-time gizmos like the Uber, and then to tell you where the bus is at any one time?
You're asking about the trolleys or the county routes?
A county bus.
County buses, yes. The newer buses especially pull much more frequently than the older buses.
We have about 600 buses at any time operating. You're saying that all of them, I can go to an app that tells me, just like the Uber app, that tells me where the bus is?
On the older buses, in my personal experiences, and maybe that's more of a question for Director Bravo, but in my personal experiences, the older buses do have issues. The newer buses, the routes that run newer buses generally are very reliable.
And this, yeah, they have tracking information, so you can go to an app or you can go online and you can see.
And it
where-
shows you the bus
how soon
moving,
they're-
like the Uber?
Yes, it'll show you the position, the GPS position.
If you're at a bus stop, how long until the next bus arrives and all, and that.
Does it show you the bus as it moves like the Uber? There we
Yes.
go, Madam Director.
About 3 years ago, we upgraded our app, the MDT tracker, and basically that gives you real-time information on our buses. As mentioned, the older buses have older modems, so they update the information less frequently. The newer buses, the
So it's
information's
like
more
every
precise.
5 minutes, an estimate of where the bus is every 5 minutes, as opposed to real time, like Uber.
I think we have, it's between 15 seconds and a minute, the update of where it shows. And then you can actually pick a feature for your bus stop, and it tells you each bus route when the next bus is going to arrive at that particular bus route. So you could see the information various ways in the app. That was upgraded about 3 years ago. And we
How-
continue to upgrade the app.
At some point separately, I'll ask you, not necessarily in session here, how much it would cost to have the same app as the Uber application has that tells you at any time, it shows you the vehicle actually moving, and it's a lot more than the 600 buses that we have.
There's actually a wonderful app called Transit app, which is free, that the county does not need to pay for, no city pays for. That's developed by a third-party developer. That's excellent and does exactly this. So I wouldn't want the county to invest any money in it.
How much would it cost to
Oh, the Transit app already exists, is free. Anyone can download it. Fully
equip our
integrated with the
buses to
system.
connect to that?
Oh, they already integrated. It's just the modem replacement. I just
Right.
wanted to
And
make sure we
anyone-
don't invest in an
All
app.
right, then.
Anyone could log into that app.
The modem replacement, how many buses need the modem replacement?
At the rate that we're improving our fleet, it's not an issue.
Oh, that really answers my question.
Yes, we're receiving.
How many buses need a modem, what did you call it, modification, application, whatever, replacement?
Like
No
I
idea.
said, we're ordering hundreds of new buses, and those are all going to come in with a new modem. So we don't really need to replace it on the older buses that are about to be retired.
Last question. How many of our bus stops have complete shelters that have 2 walls and a little roof? What
I
percentage?
Last time I calculated, it was around 25%.
25%.
Okay. As to the other 75%, I presume we've been working on an RFP to put it out for bids that would cost absolutely nothing to the county, okay, as we did in the city of Miami, and I think Hialeah has done that in other cities, Miami Beach. How are we doing on the RFP that I've been asking about for 5 years?
Proposals are in and being vetted. We have received the proposals.
Okay, when are we going to start approving? Is it going to be by the time all of us are out of here, or?
I'm hoping to bring that contract by the end of this year. To the
entire
commission for
process has
award.
taken us 5 years, by my count.
Well, there was one issuance of the RFP, and no one responded to that proposal. We were very aggressive in the number of additional shelters we were requesting. So then there was a second RFP issued.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm not going to allow no more than 2 discussion items per agenda from here on out. Because we have 2 more pending. Commissioner Higgins.
Moving on to the next one. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
For this one? Thank you. Oh, wait, 1 second. Commissioner Morris had
Hold,
something.
hold it one second, just quickly. Back to the Houston case.
Yes, sir.
Houston chose 70-30 ridership over coverage.
Yes, sir.
Did they implement some sort of last mile, solution, trolleys or anything to deal with the removal of the coverage aspect of it?
In one particular community, they chose to spend a little bit of extra money to put a few low-frequency routes back. But by and large, the places where they cut routes, they did not implement anything like an on-demand service or microtransit service or any other kind of replacement service for those routes. They simply left them without service.
Commissioner Higgins, you have the floor.
Yes, so thank you. I'm so sorry that I have 2 discussion items today. I'll never do it again. I beg your forgiveness.
You're forgiven.
Thank you. This